The blind veteran's hand shot out and caught her wrist before she could pull away. His fingers pressed against her pulse point with the precision of a man who had once trusted that exact rhythm to guide him through the darkest nights of his life. "I'd know that pulse anywhere," he whispered, his sightless eyes wide with disbelief. "Ghost." Nobody in that VA ward had any idea what he meant. They were about to find out exactly who they'd been overlooking for the last 6 months. Hey everyone, welcome back to Nurse Files, the channel where the quiet ones turn out to be the ones who carried everyone else through the worst nights of their lives. If you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe, drop a like, and let me know where you're watching from. Let's get into it. Rosewood VA Medical Center handled more veterans in a year than most people saw in a lifetime, and Nora Bennett had spent the last 6 months working its quiet night ward without a single person there knowing the first real thing about her. She was 36, medium height, dark blonde hair kept in a low ponytail, a face that carried a stillness people often mistook for detachment. She moved through her shifts efficiently, said little beyond what her patients needed to hear, and never once mentioned anything about a life before Rosewood. Nobody had asked. In 6 months, not one person had thought her worth asking. "She's a strange one," said Nurse Bethany Cole, the ward's senior charge nurse, refilling her coffee one slow afternoon. "Doesn't join the group chat, doesn't come to the holiday parties. I asked her where she trained, and she just said, around." Around, like that's an answer. "Maybe she's just private," said Oscar, one of the younger orderlies, glancing toward the supply room where Nora was restocking gauze with quiet efficiency. "Private is fine until it's weird, and this is starting to feel weird." Dr. Preston Wade, the ward's overseeing physician, wasn't much kinder. 51, silver at the temples, the kind of doctor who wore his decades of experience like armor against anyone questioning him. "Bennett," he said, barely glancing up from a chart. "Nothing complex on a slow shift." "Understood, doctor." "No questions? No opinions?" He seemed faintly disappointed by her compliance, the same way some men were disappointed when nobody gave them a reason to prove themselves right. "Good. I prefer a staff who know their limitations." Nora said nothing. She simply nodded and continued her rounds, carrying the same quiet composure she brought to every shift, 6 months of small dismissals settling into a place she'd long since learned not to let bother her. She'd learned, in another life entirely, that being underestimated wasn't a wound, it was cover. People who assumed you had nothing worth noticing rarely watched closely enough to see what you actually carried. That evening, a new patient arrived in the quiet wing, Walter Higgins, 74, a blind veteran being monitored for a cardiac irregularity following a fall at his assisted living facility. Gentle, soft-spoken, prone to long silences that made most of the staff a little uneasy around him. "He doesn't talk much," warned Nora, handing off his chart. "Some of these old guys get like that. Just do vitals, keep him comfortable, don't push." "Understood." Nora entered his room quietly, careful with her footsteps out of habit rather than instruction, aware that a blind man's world ran on sound and touch far more than most sighted people ever appreciated. "Mr. Higgins," she said, softly. "I'm Nora. I'll be checking your vitals tonight." "Evening," he said, voice rough but calm. "You move quiet. Most of them clomp around here like they're stomping out a fire." "Old habit," Nora said simply, reaching gently for his wrist to check his pulse. The moment her fingers found his pulse point, his hand shot up and closed around her wrist, not aggressively, but with a sudden, absolute certainty that made her go still. "Wait," he said, his sightless eyes widening, his breath catching. "Wait, no, that's not possible." "Mr. Higgins?" "Your pulse," he said, voice trembling now. "The way you check it. 2 fingers, right on the point, steady pressure, no hesitation." His grip tightened slightly, not with fear, but with something closer to disbelief. "I'd know that touch anywhere. I've had that exact pulse check called into my ear over a radio 100 times in the dark, when it was the only thing telling me somebody was still there." "Sir, I think you may be confusing me with Ghost," he whispered. "Your ghost." The room went very still. Nora didn't move, didn't pull her wrist away. For 6 months, she'd carried a silence so complete that even her own reflection had started to forget the person underneath it. And now, in one dim hospital room, a blind man she'd never met had reached out and found her anyway. "I don't know that name, sir," she said quietly, but something in her voice had changed, gone soft and careful in a way it hadn't been all night. "You do," Walter said. "I lost my sight in an ambush 11 years ago. I lost half my squad in the same 5 minutes, but I didn't lose everything, because somebody stayed on that radio the whole night, checking my pulse by feel because I couldn't see anymore to check it myself, telling me I wasn't going to die out there." She called herself Ghost, never gave a real name, just stayed on comms until extraction came. His unseeing eyes searched blindly toward her face. "That was you, wasn't it?" Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, "It was." Walter's grip on her wrist finally loosened, but he didn't let go entirely, like a man afraid the moment might vanish if he released it too soon. "I never got to say thank you," he said, voice cracking. "I never even knew what you looked like." "You still don't," Nora said gently, a small aching smile in her voice. "But I remember your voice. I remember exactly which channel you were on." Down the hall, unnoticed by either of them in that moment, Bethany had paused outside the door, having heard just enough of the exchange to feel the ground shift slightly beneath 6 months of careless assumptions. Walter's cardiac monitor, quiet and steady for most of the evening, chose that exact moment to spike into an urgent, irregular rhythm. "Sir, I need you to stay calm," Nora said instantly, her voice sliding into a different register entirely, level, controlled, the sound of someone who had talked frightened people through far worse than a monitor alarm. "Something's wrong," Walter said, his breath catching, one hand pressing instinctively to his chest. "I know. I've got you." Nora was already moving, checking his pulse properly now, reading the rhythm with a speed that had nothing to do with 6 months of quiet room duty. "Bethany, get Dr. "Wait. Tell him we've got a cardiac event in room 14. Sustained arrhythmia, and I need the crash cart just in case." Bethany, startled into motion, ran for Wade. Dr. Wade arrived moments later, still adjusting his glasses, glancing at the monitor with the mild irritation of a man interrupted during a slow shift. "What exactly are we dealing with, Bennett?" "Sustained ventricular tachycardia, developing fast," Nora said, not looking up from Walter's pulse. "He needs immediate intervention, doctor. This isn't going to resolve on its own." "Let me assess first," Wade said, unhurried, reaching for the chart instead of the patient. "Doctor, there isn't time for the chart," Nora said, an edge of steel entering her voice now. "His pressure is dropping. I need you at the bedside, not at the desk." "I don't take direction from night nurses on cardiac assessment, Bennett," Wade said, mildly annoyed, still reviewing the chart. "Then take direction from the monitor," Nora said, gesturing sharply at the readout, "because it's telling you exactly what I'm telling you, and every second you spend arguing about who gets to say it first is a second Mr. Higgins doesn't have." Something in her tone, utterly without panic, utterly without deference, finally moved Wade toward the bed. "Sir, can you hear me?" Wade asked, checking Walter's vitals himself now, his earlier irritation replaced by genuine urgency as the numbers confirmed exactly what Nora had already told him. "He can hear you. Talk to him. He's more scared than any of us, and he can't see your face to know we're handling it." Wade, to his credit, adjusted immediately. "Mr. Higgins, we're right here. We're going to take care of you." Together, Wade and Nora worked through the escalating crisis, Nora's steady guidance shaping every step, even as Wade nominally led the intervention. A careful dance of medication, monitoring, and calm reassurance that stabilized Walter's rhythm over the next tense 15 minutes. By the time his heartbeat settled back into a steady, normal pattern, sweat had soaked through the back of Wade's shirt, and something in his expression had shifted entirely. "How did you know the severity so fast, before I even looked at the monitor properly?" Because I've spent a lot of years learning to read a crashing pulse by feel alone, long before I ever worked in a hospital with monitors to confirm what my hands already knew. Walter, weak but stable now, managed a faint, exhausted smile. Ghost, still keeping people alive in the dark. Wade's eyes moved between them, confusion plain on his face. Someone want to explain what that means? Nora hesitated only a moment before answering. It means, doctor, that you almost lost a patient tonight because you trusted a chart over a combat medic's read on a crashing pulse. The room went silent except for the steady, reassuring beep of Walter's monitor. You're a combat medic? Wade said, slowly, disbelief settling into his voice. Was. Special Operations Attachment. 6 years. Walter and I served the same operational window. Different units, same extraction network. I never knew his name until tonight. I only ever knew his voice and the exact feel of his pulse when I was the only thing standing between him and the dark. They called her Ghost, Walter said, stronger now, pride and gratitude thick in his voice. Because nobody could ever confirm who she really was, just that she was always there when it mattered and gone again before you could properly thank her. Wade looked at Nora with an expression that mixed shame and awe in equal measure. You've been running quiet room duty for 6 months. I told you tonight I didn't need your opinion on cardiac assessment. You did, Nora said, no cruelty in her voice, only fact. If I'd kept arguing, he might not have made it to see the sunrise. That's the only reason I raised my voice at all. The formal hospital review convened 3 days later, called not to punish Nora, but because a night nurse overriding a physician's initial assessment during an active cardiac event required a documented review under Rosewood's protocols, regardless of the outcome. Miss Bennett, said Dr. Adeze Nwosu, Rosewood's chief medical officer, reviewing the incident report with careful attention. You directed Dr. Wade's actions during a live cardiac emergency. That's outside your credentialed authority as a floor nurse. It is. I do it again without hesitation. That's quite a statement in a review hearing. It's the truth, doctor. Mr. Higgins was crashing. Dr. Wade was reaching for a chart instead of a patient. I corrected that in real time because there wasn't a version of that night where waiting for permission ended well for him. Dr. Wade, seated at the table, spoke up before Nwosu could respond. With respect, doctor, the review should reflect exactly what happened. I hesitated. Miss Bennett didn't. If she hadn't pushed past my hesitation, we would be discussing a very different outcome tonight, and it would be my failure, not hers. Nwosu studied them both for a long moment, then glanced at a folder on the desk. I made some calls after receiving Dr. Wade's account. Your service record is extraordinary, Miss Bennett. 6 years of special operations medical support, an extraction survival rate colleagues describe as nearly unmatched, and apparently a reputation among veterans that persists over a decade later based purely on a call sign and a pulse. Why has none of that appeared anywhere in your file here? Because I didn't want it to, Nora said quietly. I wanted to help people quietly, without my past deciding how people saw me before they even met me. And instead, Nwosu said, we very nearly let a veteran die because nobody bothered to look past the quiet. Nwosu closed the folder. This review is closed with commendation. Effective immediately, I'd like this hospital to implement a policy allowing staff to confidentially disclose prior specialized service so competence doesn't have to wait for a crisis to be recognized. Bethany, sitting quietly in the back of the room, wiped her eyes and said nothing at all, though her expression said everything her silence couldn't. The trouble that followed arrived from an unexpected place. A week later, word of Ghost being identified at a VA hospital had quietly spread through veteran networks online, eventually reaching a man who had once served alongside the same extraction unit, but for very different reasons than gratitude. He arrived at Rosewood unannounced, agitated, demanding to see her, security flagging his erratic behavior before he'd even reached the ward. I need to talk to her, he said, voice sharp with something between anger and desperation, pushing past the front desk. You don't get to just stand there, he said, breathing hard. He didn't make it out. I heard you were the one running comms that night." "What was his name?" Nora asked quietly. "Corporal Danny Reyes." Something shifted in Nora's expression. Old grief, carefully controlled but unmistakably real. "I remember him. I remember exactly what happened that night, and I've carried it every day since. I couldn't reach his position in time. I've never stopped wishing I could have." "That's it?" the man said, voice cracking. "You just remember him?" "It's not enough," Nora said honestly. "Nothing I say will be enough, but I won't lie to you about what happened, and I won't hide behind rank or protocol to avoid this conversation. You deserve the truth exactly as it happened if that's something that would help you." Security arrived, tense and ready to intervene, but Nora raised a hand, calm despite the risk, and spent the next hour in a quiet side room speaking honestly with a grieving brother about a night neither of them would ever fully move past. By the time he left, his anger had settled into something quieter, sadder, and finally no longer aimed at her. "Thank you," he said at the door, voice unsteady, "for not running from it. Thank you for finding me. I think I needed this as much as you did." Rosewood VA Medical Center changed in the months that followed, in ways both large and small. Dr. Wade requested additional training directly from Nora, humbled in a way that visibly reshaped how he approached his patients, slower to dismiss, quicker to listen, especially to the staff working closest to the people in front of him. Bethany and Nora grew into an honest friendship, built finally on truth instead of assumption. Walter Higgins remained at Rosewood for observation another week, and every single day Nora sat with him during her rounds, no longer ghost and veteran, simply two people who had once kept each other alive without ever seeing each other's faces. "You still keep people alive in the dark, just a different kind of dark now," Walter told her the day he was discharged. "Maybe that's the only kind that ever really mattered," Nora said. She hadn't needed anyone to recognize her pulse to know who she was. But now that someone finally had, she understood something she hadn't let herself believe in a long time. Silence is not the same as disappearing. A name forgotten is not a life unlived. The steadiest hand in the darkest room is often the one nobody thought to ask about. Recognize gently, listen fully. The truest heroes rarely announce themselves. They simply stay on the line, steady the pulse, and let the dark remember them long after the light returns. The end. This story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes only.